I must have been around 7 or 8 years old when my mother enrolled me in Girl Scouts, and we went on an outdoor mission the first week after school ended. I know there were real Girl Scout camps, but there weren't any in my area. Some older members were exploring the idea of starting one, but for this trip, they rented a spot in a regular camping ground and sent us off. My mother had been a Girl Scout since she was a little girl, and she became a counselor during her college years. She wanted me to join too because she still had friends from those times and said that I could use the social skills. I wasn't a huge introvert, but I wasn't the life of the party either. Our counselors must have been in their mid-20s or at least over 18. They were all girls. I noticed rather quickly that some of us weren't especially suited for the wilderness, despite what the scouts were supposed to represent. But it was one thing to catalog flowers in your friend's mom's big garden, and a whole other to truly try to survive in the woods. We were around 30 little girls being managed by 3 18 to 20-year-olds. I understood faster than others that our counselors weren't as dedicated to the task as the people who were normally in charge. During the school year, my first as a scout, we had an older woman as a troop leader. I'll call her Mrs. Evans. She was essentially training the younger ones who became our counselors but didn't come with us on that excursion, and my peers started to notice the indifference of our counselors soon enough. And one of those girls was Tana. She was a natural leader, even at 8 years old. Some people just have it, and it wasn't because she was popular. She was organized and could take charge. I'm sure that attitude has served her well wherever she is, but that summer trip could have messed us all up. It was day 3, and Tana had managed to get on the radar of one of those counselors. I'll call her Paula. As luck would have it, Paula was Mrs. Evans's granddaughter. Big cliché, the Nepo baby who doesn't care. Anyway, another thing that made us all admire Tana was that she knew how to talk back. I don't know if she did it at home, but she stood up for herself even when it would have been more convenient to just shut up and take it. Paula hated that Tana corrected her and did it often, even when Paula grimaced and spoke through her teeth. Tana didn't care, and soon enough, we were all snickering at how angry Paula got every time she was wrong. It was small, inconsequential things like not knowing the real name of a plant and how a compass works in real life. The worst happened during a longer hike. Paula was leading the entire 30 girls on her own. The other counselors stayed back to prepare for another activity they had planned, otherwise known as doing nothing and smoking weed, but I didn't understand any of that until Tana told us later. She was also more knowledgeable, street smart than the rest of us. Anyway, about an hour into the hike, we were fully lost. Paula had a map in her hands, but she turned it in her hands many times, and she got her phone out, but there wasn't enough data to get Google Maps working. Some of the girls raised their hands with suggestions like, "Miss Paula, let's look for moss on the side of trees. Let's follow the tracks back. Let's do this," etc. And Paula lost her last nerve, screaming, "Shut up. I know what I'm doing and you don't." And you may ask, who else lost her marbles? Well, Tana did. She laughed, loud and echoing through the trees, and she said things like, "You have no idea what you're doing. I can't believe you're even related to Mrs. Evans." I think Paula was 2 seconds away from slapping the mouth out of Tana, but that little 8-year-old took the map out of her hands, told us to follow her, and walked. And we followed. As we walked, Tana explained how to find clues in the forest, actual very important things that we should know to try and survive in the wilderness. And we were back in the camp in no time. We all cheered, clapped, and hugged Tana, saying that she was the best, that she should be a counselor. Paula heard it all as she stomped past us and beyond to the other counselors. One of them told us to rest and get ready because we had other stuff to do that day, but we had barely changed and chatted a little before Paula called Tana out. I knew that what was coming wouldn't be good, but they made the other girls stay near the campsite. I didn't see it, but here's what happened. Paula and another counselor took Tana to the small meadow. They tied her to a beach chair one of them had brought and impaled onto the ground. They proceeded to slap Tana's face until their hands hurt, and left her there for hours. They returned, telling us that Tana had a special task for the group and wouldn't be joining us for some time. But at night, we grew concerned, and I wasn't brave or really a leader, but when other girls said that they would sneak past the counselors to see if they could find Tana, I went along, and we found her quickly. That day had been scorching. Tana's face wasn't only red from the slaps, she was sunburned to a crisp and thirsty like nothing else. One of us had thought about bringing water, and she gulped it down pretty fast. I had never imagined any adult would be capable of such a horrible act. We untied Tana, took her to the tent, and one of us had a phone, Christy, because her mom was very paranoid about things, and we called her, and soon all the parents were informed. Mrs. Evans arrived at the campsite a few hours later. She guided us to the parking lot where several parents had volunteered to come get us and carpool around until we all got home. Tana's parents wanted to press charges on Paula and her friend, but I'm not sure what happened with that. They must have reached a settlement because I never heard of any escalation, court hearing, or even an arrest. Mrs. Evans had to quit Girl Scouts, sadly. I felt bad for her because she was an awesome woman, but her granddaughter had been involved. There was no coming back from that. And meanwhile, I also begged my mother to quit. She allows it because what happened was just too horrible for words. And after that, she let me develop my social skills however I wanted. And rest assured that group activities were never my thing again. When I was 16, my family went on a vacation to Cancun with a big chunk of our extended family. It was an all-inclusive package, so we never left that hotel. Our days consisted of sleeping, eating, and going to the beach right by the hotel because my family didn't want to spend a single penny more to, explore the beautiful city. You must know that sleeping after a day at the beach or a pool hits a little harder. You're in bed and you feel like you're still in the water, but you're more tired than ever, so you sleep like the dead. Some days I didn't even notice how tired I was until I woke up the next morning. My parents would wake me so we didn't miss the hotel breakfast, which closed at 9 a.m. One night was very strange, though. We stayed up much later than usual, and I was nodding off. I had stayed with my aunt and some of my cousins talking about the stars and the darkening beach and how pretty everything was. I wanted to ask my aunt if we could try to take a bus and see more of the city. Cancun is a touristy place, so it really wouldn't be dangerous. But my aunt and her husband were wishy-washy, and I get it, years later. Going on a vacation with your whole family is pretty expensive, so an all-inclusive was the best way to do it. If we went out, we would undoubtedly want to spend money or eat somewhere, and that just wasn't in the budget for anyone. But they told me they might want to go somewhere on our last day. I smiled at her, and honestly, I don't remember much of the rest of the night. I was really sleepy, and I went with them back to our rooms. My aunt and her family had been given rooms on the floor right below us. I don't know how or what happened, but the next thing I knew, I was waking up and thinking that I was in my aunt's room. So I got up from bed, went out, took the elevator, and knocked on our room door. I was calling out to them saying, "Mom, Dad," yelling my sister's name and banging on that door. It was probably around 4 a.m. The door swung open and I stumbled slightly inside. 2 big hands grabbed me, and I thought it was my dad. I told him I slept in my aunt's room and I was sorry. But I suddenly focused and it was like bam. An instant chill ran through me. A fully naked man with the hairiest chest I had ever seen at 16 was there. I'm focusing on the hair because I don't want to talk about everything else that I saw for the first time ever as well. And he was angry, and he looked like he had just woken up. But all I thought was, what did he do to my parents? Why was he naked in our room? And also, why was he still grabbing me? I then asked him, "What are you doing here?" He looked at me strangely and stepped closer, but I just bolted out of there. I went down to the lobby and there wasn't anyone around to help me. I thought about yelling for someone, but I don't know. I was just confused for some reason. So I sat down and tried to breathe. I don't know how I fell asleep again, but I woke up after my sister slapped my head incredibly painfully, She started to berate me, saying, "Are you crazy? How can you just sleep here?" I tried explaining myself, and she told me that I was never in my aunt's room. I had gone to our room just like always, and she felt me lying down next to her. But I swear I had almost seen my aunt and her husband sleeping in the other bed when I woke up and left. I spent the rest of our vacation thinking about what had happened. My sister told everyone and they all laughed at my expense. My aunt confirmed that they had gotten out of the elevator before me, so they assumed that I had gone to my room. After teasing me for a bit, they all concluded that it must have been just some sleepwalking episode. I never told her or anyone about the naked man, but I thought about him. Anything could have happened to me. Waking up a random dude as a 16-year-old girl in the middle of the night on vacation and basically falling into his arms. And I'm just so glad that he let me go. Also, nothing similar has ever happened to me again. I didn't have a sleepwalking disorder, thank God, but whenever I go to hotels or other vacations, I have a little ritual of checking the door number before falling asleep. My husband says it's OCD, but I say it's being careful. I went to a summer camp where everyone slept in these huge tents. Around 10 children fit into one. We had beds, but we wrapped ourselves in sleeping bags on top of the mattresses. There was only one building on the entire grounds, and it served as a counselor headquarters, a recreation area, and dining hall, etc. Even the toilets were outhouses, although they were much cleaner than the porta-potties I've had to use at concerts. One night I woke up because I had to pee. It was pretty dark and scary, so I hurried out, did my messiness, and was on my way when I stopped. I saw a man holding a torch, a literal torch from movies with fire and everything. He opened the flap of one of the boys' tents and shined that light inside. I thought that he must be the security guard at the campsite, and I didn't want to get in trouble, so I walked briskly away. My feet stepped on a branch, however, and he turned to look at me. It was almost comical if it wasn't terrifying. And he looked surprisingly spooked too, and I just walked to my tent as fast as I could. Through the fabric, I saw him going away, and I hoped that he wouldn't rat me out for being outside so late. I was an anxious kid, and I was worried all night about getting punished and being excluded from activities because I wanted to pee, and I even rehearsed what I would say to the counselors if they called to scold me. And since I couldn't sleep at all because of my anxiety, I saw the light torch going back and forth through the campsite. It only made sleeping more difficult because I expected him to come back and check our tent. When the sun started to rise, my eyes shut for just a little while before we were all woken up for the day. And by lunch, I couldn't even hold my head up until I saw 2 female counselors approaching me and asking what was wrong. They took me to the side, and only later I learned that they wanted to see if I needed the nurse. But at the moment, I blurted that I had gone out last night to pee. I had seen the camp security guard with his fire torch, and I was worried that I would get in trouble with everyone here because he saw me. I also told them that I had seen the guard doing their rounds all over the site, and I hoped that he wouldn't check on the girls' tent going forward because he would wake me up easily and it was hard for me to fall asleep again. I said all of this very quickly, and I said all of this hoping that they'd listen because I didn't want to repeat myself. I was breathing hard as I opened one eye and sneaked a look at their faces, and I only saw this weird look of confusion and horror. One of them asked, "What security guard?" I told them it was a man who had a real fire torch and was looking through the boys' tent when I walked back from the outhouses. And they looked mortified and told me to go back to my lunch while they ran off somewhere. I went to the table and talked to the others about the security guard, and only one other kid had seen a light late at night. He was glad it was just the guard because he thought it was something scary. But after lunch, the director of the camp made an announcement that we would pack all of our things up because our parents were coming for us. We were all so disappointed. Why? What happened? And all we could do was speculate. A girl in our tent said that it must be bad weather coming or something, so it was just better to go home, but we still had many days left. That was pretty sad. We saw cars arriving, and it was a bit disastrous, but my mom hugged me tightly and didn't let me go in the car for a while. Nothing else was said, and I never went to any sleepaway camp again. Years later, I ran into a girl from that tent. Her name was Cherry, and she was older than most of us. I was shy and didn't talk to her much that summer, but she remembered me. And we reminisced a little about that summer camp, and I wish I'd gone to others. But Cherry said that there was no way our parents would ever allow that after what had happened. I asked her what she meant because as far as I was concerned, we had been sent home because of weather. I never questioned it, and she says no. The counselors discovered that a man who had been released from prison around that time was living in a shack near that camp spot. No one knew until someone, me, alerted them about a man lurking outside with a torch at night. Cherry went on to add that he was a registered sex offender. So yeah, the camp had to close down. She told me that she had begged her parents to go to another camp for years, but they wouldn't allow it. When she whined and prodded, they had come out with the truth, and that truth shut her up pretty quick. And it shut me up too. Do you know why Stranger Things Season 1 was so popular? Because it used to be our lives. Obviously without the upside down and paranormal stuff, but once upon a time, all we did was ride bikes and spend time with our friends, looking for adventures or pretending we were on one. This was particularly true for me during the summer. I'm sorry for sounding like a complete boomer, but I don't see kids these days doing that. I know that's in part because of technology, the internet, PlayStation, streaming, blah blah blah. I also suppose parents are a lot more careful than they used to be. My parents didn't care where I was as long as I wasn't bothering them at home. I've talked to some neighbors lately and they seem worse than helicopter parents. It's like someone is going to snatch their babies away at any minute, like a hawk with a tiny dog. My wife and I are child-free, so we'll never have that problem, and I like it because I couldn't stomach the idea that I'd have to restrict so much of my kids' freedom. My best memories came from those times when my friends around my old neighborhood got away and did secret stuff behind our parents' back. Some things were not something any adult would approve of. We stole adult magazines, but there's even more access to that today. I guess, yeah, the world is scary, but most of the time we were being kids and expanding our imagination. I remember one particular summer was the most fun, and the one that reminded me so much of Stranger Things later on. Now let me start by painting a picture of where we lived. It looked like the Edward Scissorhands town, but not so colorful. There was also an abandoned house at the far end, but it wasn't on a hill, so that one looked more like the one in the new It. Yes, there was a story to that house and everyone knew it. A couple of years before my time, an old woman died in there, and her body decomposed for some time before the smell reached the neighbors. They got her, got the house cleaned up, and it was put up for sale. No one bought it. It randomly burned down one day, which left it with black, dark gray outside walls, and they gave up trying to sell it. My family moved to that neighborhood years later, and by the time I had any kind of consciousness, I knew everyone avoided that place. That summer, I won't tell you the exact date, my buddies and I, 11 to 13 years old, were somehow obsessed with Monopoly. I know I said before that my friends and I looked for adventures, so we should have been playing Dungeons and Dragons like that show, but no. We liked Monopoly because it was also a pretty long game. One of my friends, Jonas, had made us start playing because his dad told his mom that it was a smart game and would help him in life. His mom was very strict, unlike the rest of our folks, but with that game, he got to have us all in his room for hours, playing almost every day without an issue. But anyway, one night we finally got bored because most of us went bankrupt and only 2 were left in this weird stalemate. We packed up the game and talked about owning houses in real life. Jonas said that he would be happy with his parents' place. I wanted something bigger because my house with my 4 siblings was way too small. Another friend, Gary, said that he wanted something close to the city, like a penthouse or condo because they looked so fancy to him. But he wanted a beach house, too, for vacation, so his plan was to make a lot of money. And we all agreed that we would all have a ton of money and do whatever we wanted. Suddenly, one buddy, Patrick, asked if any of us would buy the abandoned house. We laughed, obviously not, but he said, "Think about it. It's the cheapest house in the neighborhood." It was also the biggest plot. He would tear it down and do whatever he wanted with the land, and I said that I would never because the house was obviously cursed. Anyone else could have bought it all these years, but they didn't for a reason. Saying things like that at our age gets you teased or mocked in any group of friends, and I was embarrassed. But I said something like, "If you guys are so brave, let's go there right now and check it out." That got him quiet real quick, and I laughed. "See, you guys are too scared because I'm telling the truth." Patrick started shaking his finger, saying that he wasn't scared at all. He added that we should all go right then and there to explore. And Jonas said that there was no way his mother would let him go out with us so late. It wasn't late, it was just nighttime already. The other two friends I haven't mentioned were Charlie and Christian. They were twins, and they agreed with Patrick. And I couldn't back down, so I said, "Screw it, let's go." We planned to sneak out of Jonas's window so his mom would think that we were still in there playing. Jonas felt a little rebellious, so he joined, and we climbed out, making a ton of noise, and I don't know how Mrs. Jonas's mom didn't hear us. We got our bikes and walked them further away until we could ride. I remember that moment felt so exhilarating. Even though I had believed the stories about that house, the idea of going with my friends on an adventure on a hot summer night was like nothing in the world. It was very freeing. We pedaled, but as we got closer to the house, we saw a small light flickering in one of the windows. I almost fell forward on my bike because I hit the brakes way too hard. The rest followed my lead, their bikes echoing that metallic screeching that's so recognizable. I told them, "Wait a minute, someone's in there." Jonas's rebellion suddenly wore off pretty quickly, and he said that he wanted to go back. Patrick responds, "Well, let's see who it is," and Charlie and Christian agreed. Now Gary says, "Let's go back and tell Jonas's mom," and they all look at me. I wanted to leave, but also not. I was morbidly curious, so I said, "Let's just take a peek inside." Others asked how we were going to do that, so I told them that we would leave our bikes, crawl into the garden, just like we did to get out of Jonas's house, and take a look through the window. Jonas didn't want to do that. Patrick asked him what was the worst that could happen, and Jonas said that the ghost of the old lady could be there. Patrick rolled his eyes, saying, "Ghosts don't turn on lights." They went back and forth for a while, so I told Jonas, "Hey, you and Gary can go back, act like we're still around, and the rest of us will do this quickly and we'll be back soon." Jonas and Gary nodded and they left. And so the remaining four of us left our bikes on the sidewalk and jogged silently to this abandoned house. And the smell hit me hard because I had pressed my body too close to the walls. Years had passed, but I could smell the smoke. I started coughing and Patrick covered my mouth, giving me this look. I managed to remain quiet, but everyone smelled that smoke too. It was such a weird odor, but we kept going. We reached a window that was reflecting a bit of light and stayed down beneath the windowsill. And now that we were closer, it was clear that the light came from a candle. I whispered, asking who would peek first, and the twins shook their head. So this was between me and Patrick. He said that he would do it after hesitating a second and started lifting his head, and he came down quickly and said someone was definitely there. "Who?" I asked. "A man, I think," Patrick said. "Okay, I'll look." And I did. It was like a dark shape, covered in clothes and I think a blanket. He was sitting on the floor with his body hunched almost over the candle, and something was in his hands. I didn't understand what he was doing. I got down and told the guys what I had seen and described the item in the man's hands. Patrick peeked again, and staying there a while, he knelt after and said, I think it's something like to inhale? I think he's smoking." I was confused, so I went up again. But when I did, I only saw the figure for 1 second before he turned his entire body towards me. I got spooked a bit until another, larger figure came right to the window. And at that point, all hell broke loose. I screamed, Patrick screamed, the twins screamed, and we all ran off to our bikes. We didn't stop screaming until we got close to Jonas's house, and we lost all sense of pretense. We knocked on the door and told Mrs. Jonas's mom everything about that house. Gary and Jonas came out of his room and were all scared, but Jonas's mom called the other parents, and someone called the cops. And the long and short of it is, those two guys were a pair of junkies who had been squatting in the abandoned house for a few days before we discovered them. We got in trouble, naturally, and we tried to say that Gary and Jonas didn't come with us, but Jonas's mom wasn't an idiot. She grounded him, and we didn't get to see him for 2 weeks, which was a lot in summertime. Someone in the neighborhood managed to get the house torn down, and it was just a barren place for a while. I was told someone bought the land years later and made a new home, and they still live there, so I guess maybe there's no curse. I know this little moment in time wasn't much, but these are the stories that you talk about when you're older, the crazy things that you did with your friends in the summer, and I often wish that we could go back there. When I was 13 years old, it was the only time that I was ever sent to summer camp. All my friends from school went constantly, but the camp they frequented was too expensive for my parents. They managed to find a cheaper one that only lasted 1 week, and I got excited about the idea, even though it wouldn't be my friend's summer camp. I thought about the stories that I could tell them once the new school year started, and it was tons of fun. The campsite was near a lake, so we had several water activities. I got close to my cabin buddies, and we were planning on pranking the boys. But we never got to that part because I ended up scaring them later. On the third night of our stay, our head counselor took all of us out far past our curfew to sit around a campfire. We roasted marshmallows, the works. But then he asked if anyone knew a scary story. Almost all the boys lifted their hands, wanting to tell theirs first. The counselor pointed at each of them, and they began one by one. One boy told a story about a bear who sneaked into a cabin one night and snatched a kid away. Another had a tale about an old woman who was the founder of a campsite and had been killed by evil campgoers as revenge for punishing them. That one was pretty intense. But it was the head counselor's story that got stuck in my mind. It was about a man who lived far away from the city, cut off from everybody because his instincts told him that every other person was a monster. He couldn't see people normally like the rest of us. He saw them as dangerous creatures who were out to get him. The only way to save himself was to take an axe and cut off each of the monster's limbs and run away. Someone asked the head counselor if the man saw kids as monsters too, and of course he said yes. Others asked more questions like where was his house or if the guy had a disease in his eyes or something. The head counselor didn't have many answers for much, but he told us to remember that most scary stories told across campsites in almost every country have some basis in truth. He said our parents don't let us go out at night alone because evil people did exist, bad guys were real, and we were all just captivated by what he said. I believe he said those things because the boys had been sneaking out past curfew and getting into trouble in the woods, so he must have organized this little campfire experience to teach us a lesson in a way that we would listen. I thought it was a good idea. I wasn't the kind to go out into the woods anyways, but we had been hoping to prank the boys past bedtime. When we returned, I talked to my cabin girls and we decided not to do anything because we didn't want anyone to call our parents and ruin our camp time. And then we all just went to sleep, too tired because it was much later than our usual sleep time, but sometime later, I remember waking up. I heard a noise outside. Now this campsite had woods, although they weren't so dense, but it was still possible for wildlife to be out there and hurt you. I closed my eyes and tried to go back to sleep, but I felt like something walked past me. I opened my eyes again and lifted my torso a bit to see the head counselor walking past our windows outside. Why was he outside still? And now this part is the strangest. I don't know if I dreamt it, but I remember the head counselor coming into our cabin, meaning opening the door and flashing his light inside. The brightness didn't pass through me. He must have not seen me awake, but I noticed that he was holding something large, like a stick, in his other hand. I saw his face despite the darkness, and his eyes were huge, like he was looking for something urgently. He didn't find whatever it was because he turned, closed the door silently, and left. I don't know what he was doing or what happened. And the next day, the other girls had no idea what I was talking about. They were all dead asleep after the fire. I asked some boys if they had seen the counselor roaming about their cabin, but no one had seen him. So in my mind, I came up with two theories. Either the head counselor was playing an elaborate prank after telling us the story of the Axeman at the campfire, like a warning for the campers who love sneaking out into the trees, or I was dreaming because he told us that story. If it was a prank, though, it failed because everyone was asleep. But the image of him coming into our cabin is so vivid that I still have a hard time believing that it was a dream. When Airbnb first became popular, I thought it was the greatest idea imaginable. I wanted to take a summer vacation somewhere without spending too much because I live in the loudest, most child-populated residential building in the world. And I swear to God, you had to be careful some mornings, particularly in the summer, of kids running around with water guns. Going somewhere to relax on my own without having to deal with other families and their unruly kids sounded fantastic. I found this great spot too. It was a little beach house and the details on the app said that it wasn't a tourist town, so it was never high season, and that was perfect. And so I booked it at a great price and asked for my PTO and went on my way. It was somewhat far off, but I realized that getting out of the city was my only option for some peace and quiet. I even passed some beaches and cringed at the number of cars in the parking lot alone. It just wasn't for me, so I kept going. But as I drove, I realized that I was getting way, way out of the city, and I started to worry. My GPS said that I was going in the right direction, but I was leaving civilization behind. I stopped and got out for a second to stretch my legs. For 1 second, I felt like I had stumbled into some cowboy movie, except a little grayer. I tried calling the Airbnb host, but they didn't answer. So I got back in my car and kept driving. Finally, I saw the destination was closer on my GPS, and I gasped. It was the same little house that I had seen in the photos, except it looked much tinier and lonelier than the app showed. I parked in front and looked around. Ah, yes, that's how I saw that it could technically be called a beach house, but it just wasn't the kind of beach anyone could use. First, there was no access to it. What I mean is that the tiny house sat on this odd, low cliff. There was big, moldy rocks beyond that, and stone and sand before you got to the water, and therefore the tiny beach house that I had rented in the never high-season town was a place in the middle of nowhere next to the sea that I couldn't even swim in. Did they lie about it on the app? Not exactly. But it was a fake advertisement for sure, and I grabbed my phone to complain, but my mobile data wasn't working. I went inside and tried to find the Wi-Fi, but no Wi-Fi either. I tried calling and no one answered me once more. I looked around and saw that the interior was the only part the app hadn't lied about. It was pretty comfortable and had an air conditioning. I turned it on and I enjoyed that, and I thought to myself that perhaps this was what I truly needed. I loved the beach, but going into that water would be impossible and a little dangerous. Yet a little peace and quiet to self-reflect wouldn't be so bad. I grabbed my things from my car and settled in. The kitchen worked, the bathroom had excellent water flow, surprisingly, and there was some kind of cable on the TV, but it didn't have the best image. So the first thing I did was make myself something to eat with the groceries that I had brought for my stay here, and I took a chair outside. I sat by the window and enjoyed the sound of the waves, and it was excellent until it wasn't. Night fell quicker than I expected, and it got eerily quiet, but I told myself it was exactly what I wanted and needed. I went inside, took a long shower, and settled down to enjoy the air conditioning and just think about life. And that's when the power went out. I told myself that it would come back soon, but it didn't. 2 hours went by and the tiny house got way too hot despite our location. I looked for anything, candles or something, and I just found nothing. I had to use my phone light and open as many windows as possible, plus the doorway. And that helped because the breeze of the ocean was soothing, but it was way too dark to make me feel safe. I tried calling my hosts again, and they still didn't answer. In my head, I was already planning my serious complaint to the Airbnb so I could just get this listing out of there. The night continued, and everything the breeze moved sounded like something stranger. I was only glad the moon was shining so brightly, and I made a cold sandwich just to pass the time. Something like a bird flew close by and squeaked, although I've been told that most birds are usually asleep at night. It could have been an owl, and I refused to think about what else it could be. I finally decided to go to bed and try to sleep. I had to close the door to sleep, but the window was next to the bed, so it would help with the heat, I hoped. I lay on the stiff mattress longer than I wanted, watched the strange shadows that wove from outside into the walls, and I listened to the quiet that was never fully quiet. I didn't realize how many things you could hear when you don't have any electronics on. The mosquitoes started playing the violin in my ear. The creaking of the furniture got on my nerves, and even your own breathing is distracting. I closed my eyes while watching the moon, feeling sleep finally overtake me when I felt the light disappear suddenly behind my lids, like something was blocking the window. I didn't want to open my eyes though, partly due to sleep and partly because I'm not really sure, but I just kept sleeping. And then the moonlight was back on my face. Now I will go on to say that there was probably just a cloud covering the moon for a few moments, and finally it was morning. The power was still out and the hosts weren't answering the phone, and I couldn't take it anymore. I booked a whole week there, but I took my stuff and just left. I stopped at one of the beaches on the way back and ate the best fried fish of my life, drank an awesome margarita, and just listened to the people. A kid started crying next to me, and while I can't say that I'm grateful for it, I had to acknowledge that I was happy. Loner hermit life is simply just not for me. Oh, I did complain about that tiny house, and it was taken down, and the account was thankfully taken off of Airbnb. I've checked for months, just in case. This happened in middle school over the summer, but it was a field trip organized by the school. It was just 2 days and 1 night stay where my classmates and I would visit a historical museum and other places in the capital. We were assigned 4 kids to a room with 2 queen-size beds. We had 1 male and 2 female teachers as chaperones, but they got their rooms, just all on the same hotel floor. I have trouble sleeping on strange beds, and I got up in the middle of the night and couldn't go back. My 3 roommates were sleeping soundly, and I envied them. I grabbed my phone and started to doom scroll when I saw, or sensed may be the better word, something from the corner of my eye. The wall in the far corner was different. Have you ever heard the story, well, I think it's a creepypasta, but it could just be an internet legend, of that guy who lived an entire life after an accident, had a wife and kids and a career, but he became obsessed with the perspective of a lamp, which is how he woke up, and the whole thing turned out to be a dream after an accident. The walls felt like that story. Now, to clarify what I'm talking about, I didn't see a shadow, a face, or a ghost. It was like the walls themselves were just off-kilter, as if drawn by a child who doesn't understand point of view yet. I wondered if I was asleep or had dreamed of waking up and using my phone. I also thought that I probably was having eyesight issues and decided to tell my mom once I got back home. I fell asleep with my phone on my chest, and in the morning, the others were slowly waking up, and I stared at those walls again, and nothing seemed amiss. Everything was correct, so I knew that I had been dreaming, but I noticed something else. The other guys finished waking up and started arranging their things because we weren't coming back, but none of them would look at each other. The vibe was just really weird, and I chalked it up to us being tired and not looking forward to a long bus ride. But as we were about to leave, one classmate named Sam wondered out loud, "Did you guys see that thing last night?" I asked what he was talking about just to make sure. He said the walls were off, and I started to nod very aggressively in agreement. The other guy said the same thing. We realized that we had all woken up, but the rest of the guys were just too scared to move. I was the only one who had reached for my phone and acted like nothing was wrong. We started speculating about what it could have been during the 2-day excursions. When we got to the bus to return home, we asked others if they had seen something, and no one had, just us. But we couldn't even put a name to whatever it was we saw or experienced. I started calling it a glitch in the Matrix, but the other guys never saw that franchise, so they didn't get it. I bet you feel old now, huh? That some kids don't even know what the Matrix is. When some girls showed some interest, my classmates changed the whole story, and they told them that we had seen the shadow of a man who had been burned against the walls just to make it more spooky for everyone involved. I didn't participate in that because what happened seemed like so much more than paranormal fake stuff. All 4 of us were up and had seen it, or we all dreamt it at the same time, and I had never heard about people dreaming like that. But what could it have been? Lately, I stumbled across some videos online which explained how, in some cultures, there's a really weird belief. If you're in bed, in your pajamas, and you get an invitation or an urge to go out, don't do it because that's death calling. I never heard about it before, but somehow it makes complete sense to me these days, but kind of in a broader sense. Things that are meant to happen will. However, if there's something preventing you from doing or going somewhere, don't force it. The world is trying to tell you something. Those videos reminded me of a summer vacation I took with my husband, Charlie, a few years back. Now, the universe, as they say, was adamant about us not going, and I should have noticed the signs. First, I was trying to book our hotel reservations, and my card got declined 3 times before I gave up doing it online. I called the hotel directly, and they ran it through their system, and it still wasn't working. And at last, I grabbed Charlie's card, and that one didn't have a problem. We had planned on using my card for the rewards, but whatever. I called the bank the next day to get that thing fixed, and they did. They couldn't explain why it wasn't going through, but they said that it should work fine for the trip. The day arrived, and our car overheated on the way to the airport. We called some friends, they came to assist, got us to the closest mechanic, and when they heard that we were on our way to a vacation, they told us that they would take care of everything and gave us a ride to the airport. I can only be glad to divine providence or whoever that nothing happened on the plane. But we arrived at the 5-star hotel and there was a mix-up with our rooms. This was an expensive resort and I had investigated beforehand and reserved a no-smoking room with a fridge. We got to the room and there was no fridge and the walls had the most putrid smell. I'm especially sensitive to cigarette stench and I just couldn't stand it. And I'm afraid to say that I went full Karen on the staff, but it was warranted. After a big commotion, we got upgraded to a suite which was nice and had a great view, a pleasant Lysol odor and a fridge. Once we were settled, I called the resort restaurant that we wanted to try because I had a few food restrictions and we wanted to know if the cooks could follow it. On the phone, they said it was fine. We went down, sat, and ordered, and I explained my situation. The waiter told me to wait a second because he wasn't sure about it. I told him that we had called beforehand, but he wanted to check. I guess I should have been appreciative of the service, but it took more than 30 minutes before they told us that it was impossible to replace what I needed. Charlie was starving, so I changed my order to something not filling so we could just eat and went back to our rooms. I was trying not to get sulky or more upset because too many things had already messed with our vacation, but as we were trying to rest for the night and Charlie and I got a little cuddly, we heard this blood-curdling scream from the hallway. I can't explain how horrible it was. We thought someone was dying and went out in a panic. All I saw was two kids running up and down the hallway. Charlie pulled me back inside and turned up the TV, and we tried to concentrate on ourselves, but the scream came again, repeatedly. Then it wasn't from the hallway. The noise came from directly outside, on our balcony. I looked and those same kids were playing on the balcony of the adjacent suite, and I wanted to die. My husband was kind enough to go to their room and ask their parents to keep their children in check. The father apologized and agreed, but the craziness just kept going on for hours. I called downstairs, but no one came to tell them anything. I thought normal kids had bedtime, so I went to talk to them and was face to face with the father. I told them my husband and I wanted to rest, and the hallways or the balcony of the hotel weren't a playground for their children. But the dad said that he couldn't ask them to keep quiet because his kids deserved to have fun on their summer vacation. We called the reception again, and it looked like someone arrived to tell the children that they couldn't be roaming the halls. But they went inside, and the room shook from their loudness after that. The only explanation in my head was that they were jumping in bed and kicking the walls. I just couldn't sleep. And I was miserable, so Charlie took our bags and we left that resort. We found another one some time away and were, at last, finally in bed by 5 a.m. The next day, my husband wanted to check out the hotel casino, but I booked a spa day. I get there and the only masseuse working seems to have the worst cough. I know I sound like the biggest B word right now, but I just was so tired and disappointed. The poor woman coughed out the entire time, and after 10 minutes of it, I decided to stop. I told her to just rest, and I still tipped, but I felt cheated. I went to the casino with Charlie, and we got some respite from the bad luck for around 2 days. I started feeling my throat itching on the third, and I knew that I had caught whatever the masseuse had. I thought nothing of it and was glad that I had brought some cold medicine from home just in case, but Charlie caught it too. I don't know if I gave it to him or if the entire resort was plagued, but my husband had it so much worse. And 2 days later, I was driving him to the ER. Charlie has always been a little sensitive to respiratory infections, and a few tests later it was confirmed that he had pneumonia. I was afraid of going home with him by plane, but I bought some face masks. This was before COVID, so it wasn't that common, and got home somehow. Charlie had 2 more ER visits before he recovered, and it was the scariest time of my life. They told me that he had lowered the normal oxygen levels and put him in treatment, and by then I swore up and down that I could never take a vacation. I won't even mention how we had to live during COVID. But instead, I now believe that you should pay attention. Everything was telling us not to go, almost from the moment we left the house. Listen to the universe. Even if you honestly want to go somewhere or do something, that trip wasn't worth even a second of our pain. Nothing is. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday and Thursday at 7 p.m. EST, and there are super fun live streams on Sundays and Wednesday nights. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/letsreadofficial, or over email, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks for members of the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories and big compilations located anywhere you listen to podcasts. All links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, if you get sick, just complain to the manager.